Hi, Alexis Hasselberger here, time management and productivity coach. Now, how often have you thought to yourself, this doesn't work for me? I would like this to be changed, but I'll never go for it. Or it's selfish of me to ask, right? There's other people involved. It's selfish of me to ask. If you have ever thought that, then keep watching. This is the video for you because there are ways, surprisingly easy ways to move things in the direction that we want that don't cause that resistance for other people. And that even if we're afraid, we can make it happen. And when I work with people, right, I work with people on time management, on productivity, on stress reduction. We are looking to build sustainable change over time, right? And often when we're looking to build sustainable change, it involves changes that also involve other people. We don't work in a vacuum. We don't live in a vacuum. And so sometimes when you want to make a change, that means you also need other people to kind of get on board and make some changes with you. Not all the time, of course, but sometimes that is true. And this often involves a lot of fear, right? We don't want to be seen as needy people. We don't want to be seen as people who ask for too much. We don't want to be seen as selfish. Sometimes we're just afraid people will say no. And so we don't ask for what we want, right? And I think there's some truth to it that when we ask other people to change, they may not want to do that, right? People are resistant to change. But there's something that we can do instead that is much more effective. And this is to use the language of experimentation instead of the language of change. And I'm going to give you some examples about what this means and how we can use this. And then I'm also at the end of this video going to give you a 4-step process for making this easy and making it happen every time. So, what do I mean by learning and to use the language of experimentation over the language of change? Well, one thing that I have found is that human beings are pretty resistant to change, right? There's loss aversion. What if the new thing is way worse than the thing that we have right now, right? We are reluctant to change. But most people are willing to experiment, right? Because built into experimentation is that it might not work and we could go back, right? So people are much more open to experimentation typically than they are to blanket change. When we think about this, then we can think about like, how do we communicate things in a way that makes sense? And that isn't just lip service. We really are experimenting with something because we don't know if it'll work, right? But when you use this language of experimentation, it works so much better because even if somebody doesn't want to experiment, they're usually not willing to be the person that says that they won't experiment because that's not a good look either. So let me give you some examples of this, right? Let me give you a big example from my life. So long, long ago, over a decade ago, when my first kid was finishing up kindergarten, I was working at the time as an HR director in-house at a company. We worked in the office. This was long before the pandemic. And it was my kid's first summer after school, right? And so I signed him up for all these camps. I was going to like make it this awesome summer for him. And I did something dumb. And that is that I signed him up for all these great summer camps that were all over the city at different times, at different places. And I had already done this, spent all this cash on it when I realized, oh my God, how am I going to get him around to all of these things? Like these camps start at 9, they end at 3. Like, how am I going to do this? And I knew that I had to ask my boss if I could work from home. I also knew he was going to be super resistant to this. And I knew this because at the time, our company had essentially a no work from home policy, or the policy was like if you had to work from home on a random day because, I don't know, you're getting an appliance installed or something, if your kids were home, you had to have childcare. Now, this was pre pandemic, right? How naive we all were. But that was the rule at the time. And so I knew it wasn't going to be like, oh, just easy. I would ask to work from home for the summer and he would say yes. What I did instead was I phrased this as an experiment. I said, hey, this is the situation I'm in right now. What I would like to do is to experiment with working from home for the summer so that I can meet these needs. And what I can commit to is that we're going to really treat this as an experiment. Now, I would love to work from home long term. So if this works, if my productivity doesn't suffer, if I'm still doing a great job at my job, then I would love to see if we can continue this experiment. But if after the summer we decide for any reason that this just wasn't working, then we can go back to the way things are right now. And I was very happy that he agreed. And the reality was, I knew it would be fine because I work better at home anyways. And I just needed him to find out that it would be fine, right? And he did. My work product was great. Nothing changed. And actually, I never really worked. Ever since then, I've never really worked in an office, right? I've been able to negotiate working from home ever since then, since long before the pandemic made it something that everybody is doing. So that was a way in which I was able to phrase something as an experiment. And it was really an experiment. I was open to the fact that it might not work for some reason. I didn't think that was going to be the case, but I was open to it, right? Now, let me talk about another type of example that comes up all the time, especially with my clients, right? So, meetings, around meetings that do not work for you, especially during, when we're all working from home, et cetera. I often have a client and it's like they have this 8 a.m. meeting on their calendar every single day of the week or once a week or whatever. And it just doesn't work for them because that is the time when they are like getting their kids up, getting them to school, et cetera. And they've just kind of resigned themselves to the fact that because there are 10 other people on this meeting, that there's absolutely no way there's anything they can do about it. And that they're just going to have to suck it up and be on mute and ignore their kid and like be on this call while they're in the car. And it's just going to not be great. Right. But we experiment with treating this as an experiment. And we work through how we can ask for this, how we can ask for a change and see what's going to happen. So, usually, what this means is they'll say, "Hey, would you be open to moving this meeting from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m.? Could we try this for a few weeks? And if it works, great. And if it doesn't, we can either revert back to what's going on right now, or maybe we can find a different time." They don't have to give all the details about why and whatever and what's going on. Just say, "Hey, is this something you'd be willing to experiment with?" Most of the time, people are willing to experiment. In fact, there might be other people for whom that was a bad time anyways as well, and they're super happy that you asked for this experiment, right? And so when we do this, maybe we find, yeah, this works great, or maybe we find it doesn't work as well, but maybe if we could switch it to the afternoon, it would still work for everybody. But we are committing to come back and say, did it work? Did it not? Did it work better? Did it work worse? And what are we going to do going forward? How are we going to iterate on that? So when we use this language of experimentation, and not only the language of, but the truth of experimentation, it's much easier to get people on board and for people to be open to try something and just see if it works, to iterate from there. Now, I told you I was going to give you a 4-step process to make sure that this is likelier to work, right? And so I'm going to do that. So the first step is that you want to pose any type of experiment as a question. Would you be willing to experiment with X, right? You don't want to say, we are going to do this, right? You want to say, would you be willing to? You want to give somebody the opportunity to say no. They probably will not, but you want this to be collaborative. So pose it as a question. The next thing you want to do is include a timeline. So you don't want a never ending experiment. You want to say, let's try this for 1 month, or let's try this for 2 weeks, or whatever it is, so that people know that there is an end date to this experiment and that that's when we're going to evaluate. Then you actually want to make sure that you are accountable and do that. So if you say, hey, let's try this for a month, then you be the person to initiate after a month and say, hey, we've been trying this for a month. Is it working fine for everybody? Should we keep doing it? Or is there something that we need to tweak there, right? You be responsible for coming back to that. Put it in your task list, put it in your calendar, make sure you don't forget. And then lastly, be open to iterating or reverting or figuring something else out, because that is how experimentation works, right? It's not that we're necessarily going to get it right the first time. Maybe we do, but maybe we don't. And so be open to the idea that an experiment might elicit another experiment until we get closer and closer to something that's working. Now, I would love to know, have you tried this before? Has this worked for you? Or is there something you've been meaning to that you really want to change, but you have just been really reluctant to bring it up? Could you phrase this using the language of experimentation? And that would give you the confidence to be willing to bring this up and see if you could make a change in this way. Let me know in the comments. I would love to know. If this framework resonated with you, give a little like on this video. And if you want to see more content like this in your feed, then make sure to subscribe. See you next week.
Thank you guys for watching this video, and make sure to subscribe because only about 24% of the people that watch our videos are subscribed. Thank you.